Hello once again everybody, my name is Robius and welcome to another episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History. In this series I compare events in a selected character's life within one of the Assassin's Creed games to the actual history the individual lived through. As always, beware of major story spoilers. For today's episode we will be exploring the history of the buccaneer Jean du Casse. As some of you may have noticed, this is not the same name represented in AC4. Unfortunately, although I thought the AC character Julien du Casse was a real historical figure, it turns out he is the fictional nephew of Jean du Casse, and many parts of his life are based on his supposed uncle. For that reason, since their histories stand in parallel, including the year of their death, I'll be trying something different in this episode. Instead of comparing the exact representation of a historical figure in the game, I'll be showcasing how Jean du Casse's history inspired the representation of his nephew. As is customary, I'll begin this episode by sharing with you his pre-game history, which will inform us on the background information that helped form Julien. Then the approximate in-game history, which we will see depicted in the game. And lastly, we will analyze the differences between what happens in Assassin's Creed to the parallels of Jean du Casse's life to see how they inspired the creation of Julien. Starting with his pre-game history, Jean du Casse was born on August 2nd, 1646 in Saint-Bus, southern France. Not much information is known about his childhood. However, it is confirmed that as he became a young man, despite his qualifications, he was not allowed to join the French Navy. This was due to the fact that his parents had an allegiance to the Huguenots, and these religious differences were a large cause of conflict in France at this time. Therefore, since Jean could not apply his abilities to serving his country, he instead signed on to the slave trade, becoming a member of La Compagnie de Sénégal, that conducted its business between the continent of Africa and the Caribbean. Following a few years of service with the slavers, Du Casse made enough money to buy his own vessel, which he used to begin his independent career as a privateer. After multiple successful missions as a privateer, Du Casse returned to France, where he offered half of his loot to the French crown as a sign of good faith. It was accepted, and, as a reward, he was given the position of lieutenant in the French Navy by command of King Louis XIV. At this point, the Assassin's Creed character, Julien du Casse, had just been born around 1682. However, we can see that his career as a slave trader is very comparable to that of his supposed uncle. Returning to the real history of Jean du Casse, now a prominent member of the French Navy, his attacks against enemies of the crown grew bolder. However, prior to leading more external assaults, in 1685 he married Marthe Baudry, who was from Dieppe, France, and together they forsook their Calvinist faith. Between 1687 and 1689, led assaults in Elmina, Beerbich, and Fort Zeelandia, which were located in Suriname. In 1691, following more success, he was appointed the governor of Saint-Domingue and was widely respected by its population. Du Casse's success continued past this point as he led more attacks against multiple English colonies near his base of operations, including Port Royal, which was recovering from an extremely damaging earthquake when he struck. In 1697, under the command of the Admiral and Baron de Pointy, Du Casse led a successful raid in Cartagena, an important South American city. However, he had been promised 1/5 of the loot, which he was not given by the Admiral. Disgruntled, Du Casse sailed back to France and met with King Louis XIV in person, asking for his fair share. Since the king respected Du Casse, he gave him 1.4 million francs as compensation, promoted him to the rank of Admiral in the French Navy, and made him an official knight in the Order of Saint Louis. This next section would technically be the time in which Assassin's Creed's character, Julien du Casse, would have been operating. However, his history seems to be more of a representation of his uncle's youth as opposed to his current experiences. Back in the real history, Jean-Baptiste, after acquiring once again a more prestigious title, continued to prove himself an important asset of the French Navy. He participated in multiple large-scale confrontations, such as the Action of August in 1702, where his fleet defeated John Benbow's English vessels near Santa Marta, and the Battle of Vélez-Malaja, which was the largest conflict in the Spanish War of Succession. In 1708, Du Casse was employed by the Spanish to command the Spanish treasure fleet during its annual voyage. Not only did he successfully deliver the treasure to the Spanish, he did so with only losing a few men, which was considered a rare occurrence. As thanks, the Spanish gave him their highest honor, the Order of the Golden Fleece, in recognition of his service. In 1704, he commanded a large French fleet during the siege of Barcelona, which eventually led to the end of the War of Spanish Succession. On June 25, 1715, Jean-Baptiste du Casse died of what are assumed to be natural causes in the town of Bourbon-l'Archambault in central France. In summary, as we can see, there are multiple parallels between the lives of the real Jean-Baptiste du Casse and the fictional Julien du Casse, represented in AC4. However, they are evidently not the same person. The first main difference comes from their date of birth. Jean was born in 1646, while Julien was born in 1682. This decision is assumed to have been made so that the antagonist, who is supposed to represent more of a warrior-type figure in the game, would be at a more acceptable age of 33, as opposed to Jean, who would have been 69 years old at the time of this confrontation with Edward. A second, and minor difference between the inspiration for the character and his representation are their places of birth. Jean was born in Saint-Bus, while Julien was born in Montpellier. However, once again, this is understandable, as they had him play the role of a nephew who could have easily been born elsewhere. The following segment is an interesting parallel between the two. That's main difference is the time period in which it takes place. It is said in the game that Julien sailed with his uncle when he was younger, and in 1704 served with the French army at the Battle of Velez-Malaga, in which his uncle was a participant. However, this is the point where they differ. Jean started his career as a slaver and later joined the navy. In contrast, Julien deserted the navy at the Battle of Velez-Malaga and went to work as a slaver and later as an assassin and arms dealer. It's interesting to mark that in Assassin's Creed, when Edward is captured by the Templars early in the game, he is placed in a prison in the Spanish treasure fleet where he later escapes. It's possible this was a tip of the hat to the fact that Jean du Casse had been the commander of the same fleet a few years later. The last similarity between Jean and Julien is their year of death. Jean-Baptiste passed away of natural causes in France in 1715, while his fictional nephew Julien was killed by Edward Kenway in his great Inagua base in the Caribbean in the same year. Overall, it's interesting to consider how much Jean-Baptiste du Casse's history inspired that of the Assassin's Creed nephew, while also giving the writers of the game the freedom to mold his experiences in an order which was more suitable for the game's story. And with that, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History. And if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. In addition, as this was a different style of video compared to what I usually do, in simply analyzing direct representations of characters, I would love any feedback that you're willing to offer in the comments section below. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters you'd like me to cover. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in a future historical episode.
The cove is ours!